Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's talk, which is by Kirsty Gamble, who's Senior Records Officer for Leicestershire and Rutland Environmental Records Centre. Now, if you ever wondered what an Environmental Records Centre does, then you've come to the right place. Also, if you've ever wondered what all of the records that you collect and submit either to NatureSpot or on your spreadsheets or various other places, and how all the various recording schemes operate, then I think Kirsty is about to answer all of those questions, hopefully. And so Kirsty, over to you. We're looking forward to your talk.
Thanks, Alan. So nice to kind of virtually see you all, and we'll give this a go. Hopefully the technology will hold up, but I'm not using my normal computer, so I'm just going to put that straight out there, I'm afraid. So yeah, as Alan said, tonight I'm just going to talk a little bit about Leicestershire and Rutland Environmental Records Centre, or LRERC as it's commonly known, where we get our records from and where we send them to, who uses them. The photos within the presentation are either our own or are taken from the NatureSpot website, so thank you very much in advance if your photos do appear. So who are LRERC? We're currently about 2.5 or 3 full-time people, with Sue Timms, who's here, as our team manager, who looks after both LRERC and the planning ecologists. Myself, the Senior Records Officer, Karen, who's a records officer surveyor, and we're supported by Jenny, our admin officer. Within the wider team, we also have Donna and Chloe, who provide planning advice. And we sit within the Planning, Historic and Natural Environment team within Leicestershire County Council. And we're a small team which work to collate and store species and habitat information. We've recently been restructured, and whilst we've all worked on the Record Centre for a while, we're now able to make it more of a priority and put a little bit more time into it. And we're currently looking at new ways of developing. LRERC is part of a national network of local record centres which cover the whole of the UK. So where do we get our records from? Lots of different places is the answer to that, including NatureSpot, local authority partners such as the City Council, local recording groups such as the local BAC group and the Ornithological Society, local expert naturalists, the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust, as well as ecology consultants, to name but a few. We do also receive or download all of the data that's on iRecord. We do generate some records ourselves from habitat surveying, and we have a large number of records from the Leicestershire Museum Service that date back to about the 1960s. We receive some records direct from members of the public, but most casual records are now sent directly to NatureSpot. And the NatureSpot records are sent to us annually. So any records that you submit to NatureSpot will make its way onto the county database within a few months. So where should you send your records to? There are so many different recording schemes, societies, places, websites, mobile phone applications. The sort of opportunities are endless, really. And I think first of all, we'd like to say that we're really happy if you send your records to NatureSpot. We're mutually supportive partners, and as I say, all the data gets exchanged, so they all make their way onto the county database. Some people do choose to send their records via other routes, and that might be via us directly or through the county recorder, so the local group of expert naturalists. And there are a number of additional recording sites and phone apps that you can use. Some of them are really helpful and really quite simple to use, such as the Mammal Mapper app. And some of them are species specific or taxonomic specific, so the Bee Wars sites and the beetle recording schemes and other national recording schemes. Our only advice for wherever you send the data is to make sure that it's actually going to make it out somewhere. Make sure you know where that data is going, and then it's not going to be held on a cloud somewhere and not shared with anyone. If you're unsure of where local national or app schemes or anything go to, then drop us a line and we'll try and help it out. We don't know all of them, but we have come across quite a lot within our time. So LRERC has a database. Our database is known as ORCA, and it's run by the North Wales Record Centre. So the first thing that happens to records when they come into LRERC is that they're standardised and imported into our database. And standardisation improves the quality of the product, and it makes searching quicker and more accurate. We standardise location names, so they're very obvious where the locations are, recorder names, which allows us to filter a lot easier, as well as check in things like the grid reference and site names match as most as possible. Some data sets that come in are really very clean and there's very little work that needs to be done to them. And some are quite admin heavy from our end, but we feel it's quite important that the data is coming out in the right way. So ORCA retains the core parts of the record, so the who, what, where, when, but it also holds additional data such as abundance, comments, a hyperlink to any online photos, such as a hyperlink back to the record on NatureSpot. And it also holds the verification record of level of the record. So we can record whether the record has been assessed by a local or national expert and whether that record is considered to be correct, or whether it may be slightly dubious, or whether it's just unknown. And the slide just shows a random extract of some data from NatureSpot, which has been imported into ORCA at some stage a few years ago now, by the looks of it. So looking a little bit in more detail at the database, initially at species records, we currently have just over 1.7 million records on the database. We've also got a large number, it wouldn't surprise me if there wasn't about the same amount out there, which haven't yet been incorporated. And that might be within our own backlog, or it might be data that's not yet made its way across to us, or data that's held with a different organisation. Just to kind of qualify that a little bit more, within November, so within half a month, we've already received about 100,000 records this month into LRERC. So there's obviously a little bit of a backlog, but it's great that the database is growing so well at the moment. So the pie chart on the screen gives a rough idea of what we've got within the database. So this is just the percentage of records for different taxonomic groups. So it's quite clear that between birds and botany is about 2/3 of our database. So birds is 33% and plants is 32%, with about 560,000 records each. The next best recorded, or records that we hold taxonomic group, are butterflies and moths, which is about 8% and 133,000 records. And then we've got fungi and slime molds and beetles at about 5% each, mammals, spiders, bees, wasps and ants at about 3% each, true flies, so the diptera, at about 2%, dragonflies at about 1%, and then everything else makes up about 4% of the database. So that includes centipedes, bugs, mayflies, fish, fleas, and all the other stuff, including single records for a sponge and for a hairworm. Don't ask me what those records are because I don't know off the top of my head. So in a little bit more detail about what's on LRERC's database, I thought it might be interesting to look at sort of the earliest record that we have and the most recent records that we have. So the earliest record is actually from 1414. And the records are for some ash trees and for a fox at Gracestew. And these have been extracted from historical literature, I assume to do with the estate, where there's reference to lambs being killed by foxes and dogs and to ash trees being felled. And I think that was in the estate accounts. We then have very few records in the 18th century. and then records for every decade from the 1820s onwards. And we have about 10,000 records from 1960s, and this number has increased decade on decade. And between 2010 and 2019, we currently hold over 1 million records for that time period. So the database is growing at quite a impressive, crazy rate. Whether that's reflective of recording or whether that's reflective of records coming to us, I don't know. So the most recent records that we have on our database at the moment are from September this year, and they're actually for a common pipistrelle and a brown long-eared bat, and they were both recorded in September in Ab Kettleby, and they were sent to us as part of a document associated with a planning application. We tend to try and make sure that protected species are imported into our database every month, and other species imported within sort of 3 to 6 months, depending upon how we're going. So we're always sort of a month behind, but September, yeah, 2 little bats, not these bats, but bats. So we also hold habitat records, and these are mainly from work that we've completed internally, including a near comprehensive survey of Leicestershire and Rutland within the 1980s, 1990s, that was completed under the guidance or supervision of Ian Evans. And our surveyor Karen at the moment tends to complete habitat surveys in the summer, and that's generally on a parish by parish basis as well. So these 2 maps show roughly the same extract from Newton Harcourt. The map on the left was completed in 1990 as part of those older surveys, and the map on the right was from 2016 as a more recent survey. So these maps do allow us to compare habitats to a certain extent, although obviously slightly different criteria are used in the surveys. And within these two extracts, it's not most clear, and I'm really sorry, but the mouse doesn't work very well, so I can't highlight it. But towards the east of the picture, to the northeast of the village, there are some fields that are marked with an I on the old map, which are improved grassland, and on the new 2016 map, they're shown with that sort of grey dotted colour, which is arable. So we can see that there's a chunk of grassland there that has been lost to some arable conversion. Additionally, though, we can also see where habitat has been created, and on the western side of the map, there's quite a large pond, small lake, that's being created sometime between 1990 and 2016. So it's nice to be able to monitor both ways. And comparing the surveys in this way confirms that the habitat most at threat across the counties is species-rich grassland. And this is due partly to arable conversion, but also to natural succession, scrubbing over, neglect, and to some degree to development. And this information is used to inform our biodiversity action plan, where species-rich grassland is the retention and creation is our top priority. The comparison surveys also show that woodland cover has increased across the 2 counties. There's obviously been quite a focus of that in the National Forest area, but it is wider across the landscape as well. The amount of open water has also significantly increased. So the newer records from sort of the 2000 surveys have been extracted, and these are already onto ORCA. And as you can see, the mapping is already has been completed on a GIS system, so it's there. The older surveys haven't been mapped in the same way, but Russell Parry, one of our Botany County recorders, is actually working through and extracting the old data from the 1980s, 90s at the moment. It's really surprising how many records a botanical survey can turn up. And I think something like Harborough at the moment, about halfway through, has resulted in over 30,000 records. It's quite substantial, but as soon as the records are digitised, it really aids being able to search them and to work through them and to potentially use them for comparisons as well. Habitat data is also used to inform a suite of sites known as local wildlife sites. And these are all sites within Leicestershire and Rutland that meet some standard criteria, and they're of county level importance. They're non-statutory, but they do have some protection within the planning system. And this map is, as you can see, of sort of the Melton, Asfordby, Old Dolby kind of area. And the green shading is the known local wildlife sites that we have. So along the top, running sort of east to west, you can see a number of sites that are actually grasslands that are associated with some steep sloping land. The LRWT reserves at Holwell are on there, as well as some post-industrial land around Asfordby Hill, the gravel pit area to the south of Asfordby, and the dismantled railway line running sort of north-south out of the north of Melton. And we're still finding these sites all the time. There's a lot of land that hasn't been surveyed recently. And again, our sites database is growing as we know more as well. So they're kind of the most common internal uses of data by us here at LRERC. But our data is used and accessed by a number of different people and organisations. So I thought it was worth looking at who can access LRERC data. And our records are already shared with partner organisations such as the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust, who can view all of our database, as well as being able to filter it onto their specific reserves. The NatureSpot team also have access to the database, which helps with verification and distribution queries. And county recorders, our local experts, also use the records to check accuracy, to increase their knowledge on the distribution of species, to potentially find records that they're not aware of. And that kind of works in lots of ways to their advantage, but it's used to build up the knowledge and to be used for atlases. It can also then be fed into national recording schemes where there's links there. Records are used for academic research by request. And we don't tend to supply detailed records to other people, but we're always happy to provide a list of records under your name that are held on our database. And we can provide a species list for a specific area. So, for example, what's been recorded in the last 5 years around sort of 100 metres from your house or something like that. The final one on the slide, I think, yes, is ecology consultants. And ecology consultants are the main day-to-day users of our data, and completing commercial searches is a really key part of our role. And commercial searches are often requested by an ecologist who's working on behalf of a developer. And that's done in advance of completing a survey in support of a planning application. And we provide protected species and sites data on request, which is presented in an interactive mapping tool to the customer. And the slide shows an example of that. It's not interactive, I'm afraid, but you can see the sites, which are the green, red and brown kind of coloured shading, and then the species are dots, as you would expect a distribution map to be. And to the right of the screen, there's a series of keys that allows you to toggle different species and sites on and off. So the aim is that it just just shows the data in a way which is usable to consultants as well. And we do charge for these searches in line with the environmental information regulations, and it's the money that comes out of the searches that keeps us going and allows us to do what we do, and that's really essential to us. So as a team of people, we have agreements with 7 local authorities to provide some advice on planning applications. And the data held within by LRERC underpins the planning advice. And we specifically look at legally protected species such as bats, great crested newts, badgers, as well as designated habitats. And we, as a team, scrutinise reports by ecology consultants submitted in support of applications, and then make recommendations back to the planning authority. So the data that we hold in LRERC is used to produce some alert layers showing where species have previously been recorded, and this allows us to make more of a judgment on where they may be and how they may be impacted. So the map on the screen shows badger data, and this is all badger records, all badger set records, I should say, from 1995 onwards. So as you can see, there's a lot of badgers in Leicestershire and Rutland, with some real concentrations, which may be genuine concentrations of badgers, or they may be concentrations of where development happens and where we've got records from. But it's this data obviously at a much finer level, which is used to underpin that planning advice along with the other species and sites. So we also aim to send verified records to the NBN, and that's the National Biodiversity Network. A little behind on this at the moment. It's on my to-do list, and hopefully will be done very soon, but isn't quite there at the moment. So I don't know if you're familiar with the NBN, but it hosts an online atlas of national species distribution for all taxonomic groups. It's really useful to look at a national distribution of a species and to look at hotspots and things like that. It's less useful on a real local level. But the NBN also feeds into GBIF, which is a global biodiversity information forum, I believe, which allows our data to be used on an international level as well. The other thing with the NBN is the data that it holds actually feeds back into the NatureSpot maps that you will see under the species account pages. So the screenshots in front of you show some bullhead data. The map on the left is from NatureSpot, and that shows with the yellow squares the distribution from the NBN, and then the blue dots are the NatureSpot data. The section on the right is a screenshot from the NBN. It's actually filtered to Charnwood district, and it shows the distribution of, or the records that they have of bullhead within the area. So the two interact, and there's a real advantage to the NBN. It's probably worth a play if you have a spare 10 minutes sometimes, or if you're really interested on a specific species at a national level. Should sort of say really that data on the NBN is patchy. Not all data holders supply records to the NBN, some of which are out of date, and some of which are blurred at a very sort of 10-kilometre level. So the records are kind of useful at a national level. They're not useful at a local level, as I say. I think it's really interesting how the NBN use of data, or use of data from the NBN, can actually lead to some incorrect assumptions, such as the recent Leicester Mercury article on Leicestershire being a national hotspot for spiders. Whilst I'm sure we have great spider diversity, the stats were actually taken from the NBN, and that was because as a county, we have a lot of spider data on the NBN. So hopefully that covers some of the sources of LRERC's data and some examples of how it's being used both by us and by others. And to sum up, sorry, that's gone really quickly, but there we go. Hopefully there'll be some questions that we can expand on if needed. But why does LRERC matter? So LRERC collates data, and this means that there's a good chance that you only have to ask once for the data that you need. If we don't have the data, we can often point you in the direction of an individual or organisation that does have the data. And it's really useful for all the data to be in one place to create an archive for the future as well. And we're safe. Keeping records in one organisation with regularly backed up systems that multiple people can access is safer than a series of shoeboxes under beds where records are really very vulnerable to being lost or thrown away or just degraded. And having data backed up with a different organisation to that supplying the data also adds some more security in. It's really unlikely that two separate instances of a database or a data set will get scrambled, and therefore there's some safety to that record integrity. And we do have examples of where data has been lost in the past, where unfortunately things haven't been backed up in a sufficient way. And so hopefully we can sort of help to chip away at that a little bit. And as mentioned earlier, we're a recently restructured team, and we're currently exploring areas for development, how we can improve as a record centre, what you would like from us as a record centre. And we'd be really interested in your ideas for that, either as part of this forum or independently at a later stage. And just to finish, I just feel that I need to say, you know, if you've got any records, please send them on. They do all add up to something, and they are all important in the big scheme of things. So yeah, please send the records either to us or to NatureSpot or to another place of your choice, as long as they get forwarded on. So yeah, sorry, Alan, that's incredibly quick, but there we go. There's our contact details if you wanted to get hold of us at all. Okay.
Thank you, Kirsty. That's great. I don't think you said this. I don't think I missed it. Do you know what the total number of records in the database currently is?
We're currently on 1.7 million.
1.7 million. How long until you reach 2 million? The present.
Oh, there's a question. I would love to say
Sort of how many records per year are you adding to the database?
It's really variable because it depends how things come in. So at the moment we're getting the big project that LRERC have just taken part in digitising all of their old records, and people here may or may not have been involved with that. So essentially LRERC should be giving us about 1 million records in the next year. So it's not quite representative, but I would expect to hit 2 million by mid next year if everything kind of goes to plan, really. I'm saying that and hoping for the best now.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm just going to turn your slides off here. So you're happy to take some questions?
Yep, give it a go. I'm sure.
Great. So if anyone's got any questions, can you make yourself known? Either put your hand up in the chat window or wave your hands or whatever. I've got one actually. You mentioned mobile apps. This is the big growth area at the moment. I mean, on NatureSpot, we've seen mobile access overtake conventional computers and desktops in the last couple of years, and it just continues to grow. The use of mobile devices is just going up and up and up. And obviously if people are out in the field as well, then that's quite understandable. There are obviously commercial uses to the data which you hold, which you've talked about, but I don't know what proportion of the data you've got is from amateurs to, and I use that as a badge of honor. I don't use that as an insult. But in other words, non-commercial. How many people who are not being paid are supplying your data? And because the reason I asked the question is I want, what are their motivations? Because I think you see this coming across when you look at mobile apps. There's this new generation of mobile phone apps that have appeared, which promise to use artificial intelligence and identify everything for you. And while, in a few years' time, I'm sure that's going to progress because there seems to be a big market for that. I suspect there are also big pitfalls. So have you got any more thoughts about mobile apps and how that interacts with your work?
I think kind of going back to your initial question, sorry, about sort of percentage of data and where it comes from. I've never worked that out. It should be straightforward, but it's not. But gut feeling is that the majority is from amateur naturalists rather than ecological consultants. Ecological consultants are quite focused on what they're looking at. So a good chunk of our protected species data would be from eco consultants, but very, very rare that we get very good invertebrate lists or anything like that from them. So and similarly with birds, the majority of our bird records are from LRERC. So again, amateurs. And I think that that really does show the value in recording, and that all of us around the table can do. So I think that's sort of that point. In terms of mobile phone apps and things like that, it's definitely growing. We're a little anxious about them, I think, for the same reason that other people are. We, as I sort of touched on, we are quite concerned that the data is going somewhere from them. I think it's quite easy to sort of blindly download an app which looks amazing when you read the blurb associated with it or the website that's attached to it, but it doesn't always say what that data will feed into. It will sometimes say, it's really important we get this data, but nothing about why. And I think that's really important to check out. In terms of sort of the artificial intelligence stuff, all I would say to that is that my own personal experience is that you can get some very, very odd answers as a result of it. And I'm sure that it has got a place, and I'm sure that it will develop further and further and get better as technology generally is doing. But overall, I think it needs to be taken very much with a pinch of salt, or maybe a pinch of salt and your ID guides beside you as well.
I mean, I guess you're not in the business of making recommendations as far as apps or warning people off apps. I suppose you're legally prohibited from doing that. But there's an awful lot of public surveys where the public are sent out, into the field and spend an awful lot of time recording stuff, and that data just never goes there. Oh, Spring Watch, it never goes anywhere. And it just vanishes into the ether, which is a great shame, really.
Yeah, I think it is a shame, and I think maybe there's nothing wrong with recording against those kind of schemes, but maybe just look at duplicating your data in some cases. If you're not sure where it's going towards a bigger thing, maybe look at putting your data somewhere else as well. Make sure it's not being duplicated, because that's a lot of effort for everyone if it goes to LRERC and to NatureSpot, for example. But if it's going to somewhere where you're not quite sure, then maybe it is worth having sending it somewhere more locally as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Linda, you've got a question.
I have a question about how do you ensure that things aren't getting double recorded? So you mentioned NatureSpot, and this thing. I use an app. I've just recently taken on kind of fungi recording for the Rutland Natural History Society, which is an absolute nightmare, as you can well imagine. So I've got this app, the picture mushroom thing, which comes up with North American mushrooms all the time. I'm absolutely convinced of it. So I use that as a kind of a guide. I don't use it as a recording application, because I have no idea where it goes to. So what I do is I try and identify it and send it to Ben on NatureSpot. But how do you ensure if somebody else is doing the same thing and they maybe send it directly to you, or if they have an app that does actually record it and you get it, how do you ensure that this particular taxa hasn't been double recorded?
To be quite honest, and I know this sounds a bit daft, but we don't worry about it. The issue of duplication is just endless. Sometimes duplicates are really easy to spot if you've got exactly the same location, exactly the same day, etc. Yeah. So often little bits of the record get tweaked ever so slightly along the way, which makes it really very hard for us. So we don't tend to worry about it. What we do make sure we do is record every record against the source that it came in on. So we will have the NatureSpot data that's stored in sort of a separate what's called a data set on our database, in comparison to records that come in directly to LRERC or via iRecord in a different manner. We could look at duplicates in the future. It's kind of on the list of things that we'd like to look at, but I think tackling it is an absolutely mammoth job. Understood. And kind of like to hope that the county recorder or whoever was pulling an atlas together would actually be interested in all the records and then potentially filtering out the duplication. But I'm saying that without talking to them. I do appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a question from Ben in the chat window. This is gonna I don't know if you've seen this or had advance notice, because I think this is going to take some thinking about. What's the most exotic record that's ever been submitted to the Record Centre? That's a good question.
Oh, I think it depends if you're talking about records that are real and verified or records that aren't, to be honest, because I think there's two very different.
Let's go for the verified one, shall we?
Verified one, I actually couldn't tell you, to be honest. Sue, I don't know if you have any ideas. Just as you're there, I might as well pick your brains as well.
Yeah. We've got an alligator. That's got to be.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, there's one turned up in the River Soar in the 60s, I think.
Is that real? A verified alligator? This isn't like the
question.
This isn't the apocryphal ones that used to live in the sewers of New York, is it? This is a real alligator?
I think so, yeah. I think the River Soar used to be a lot warmer than it is now because of the power station that used to be where the football ground is now. That was Lord Ike's power station. So I think it was quite warm. So there were exotic fish in there as well, I believe. Ben might know more about this, actually. Ben, I don't know. I'm sending your own information back to you. But we have got records for wallabies, haven't we? And we've got those monkeys in Exton Park.
Yes, exactly. We've got the monkeys in Exton, but I wasn't convinced that would work on the verified kind of conversation.
Bushby, I remember that one.
Yeah.
Did I can't remember the recent vulture didn't actually come into Leicestershire, did it? I think it just stayed just the other side of the border. I mean, it overflew Leicestershire on its way back to France, but I'm not sure if we've got any actual records.
No, I imagine that LRERC may have, but they won't have made it to us yet.
No, okay. Oh, so there might be vulture. Well, vulture versus alligator. I think a lot of people would pay to see that. So, excellent.
It's a whole nother game.
When we finish here this evening and stop recording, I'll ask you about the monkeys, but we'll do that offline maybe. So another question from Phil: are some parts of the county better recorded than others? And I think we've seen from your maps that the answer to that is probably yes. And then does the recording level affect the way the records can be used?
Yeah, the distribution of pretty much every taxonomic group across the county has a real bias, and that bias is the same for whatever you look at. So there's the same gaps in the bird data, in the botany data, in any invertebrate data, and that's there's sort of a big hole in Harborough. And then there's some holes around North Melton in different places as well as other little patches that are missed out. And these don't seem to be recorded. I think the general assumption is that it's just those places where people don't really live. They're not particularly well populated, and they're also not particularly inspiring. So whilst there's bound to be some good things there, they're not good enough to actually draw people to them. So kind of endless farmland, really. In terms of does the recording level affect the way the records are used? I think that's actually a really difficult question to answer. I think it shouldn't impact how the records are used. I think what it can do is actually sway our assumptions on distribution. It can look like there are genuine holes in the county where species or certain species aren't recorded, when actually they may be present but not recorded. Sorry, that didn't make much sense.
Harborough could be just crawling with alligators, and you know, we don't know, do we? Frankly, because we just don't have the records.
There's a task for the weekend.
I mean, there are quite significant parts of this question comes up endlessly, of course, and there are quite significant parts of the county where there just isn't good access. It's private land. There aren't public footpaths. That, you know, maybe there are a few road verges, but I mean there is, I mean, for a really quite developed county like Leicestershire and Rutland, you know, it's amazing that we have these gaps, but there are quite big no-go areas, really. So it's I mean, I suppose for things like trees, I wonder if you could get it from satellite data. Some of the spy satellites must be able to tell an ash tree from an oak tree, I would think.
It's a lot of work to go through, though.
Well, that's where your artificial intelligence comes in.
It is, yeah.
Sue's going to tell us that she's already got a satellite and she's about to deploy it.
Or a drone.
I'm going to say the County Council doesn't have access to military spy satellite data, sadly. I think you're right. There probably is a much higher resolution imagery out there that isn't accessible. I think one thing that it is worth just raising here, though, is that some county recorders do encourage people to do what is called tetrad bashing, which is going to a particular group of 4 kilometre squares, often under-recorded, and spending a day there and just recording all you can. And certainly Geoffrey and the Russell and Steve, our 3 botanical county recorders, have done loads of that. I think Ian Merrill as well hasn't he, Kirsty?
Yeah, he's done some.
And Adrian Russell, as well as the county moth recorder, is encouraging people to do that. So it's always worth, you know, if you're hooking up with a county recorder and seeing whether there's any under-recorded areas that you could make a bit of a project of going to do in a season. If you want to make your records count, that is probably the most useful thing you can do, actually.
Thanks, Sue. Have we got any other questions or comments, Peter?
Yeah, you've got this enormous number of records coming in. I'm astonished how many there are, and you're manually having to standardize them. Is there anything we can do to help? What are the big problems that come up with unstandardized records?
The key things that would really save us some time our end, and I believe that if it's coming in via NatureSpot, I think there's prompts now for this. Kind of hoping that someone will nod at me. Yes, thank you. But that's things like making sure that your site name actually means something. So if you're recording a hedgerow, that it doesn't just say hedgerow, but it says Melton Mowbray hedgerow or Sysonby Lane hedgerow or something like that. If that doesn't happen, we have to go through and kind of put the grid references into a GIS program and work out a sensible location. So that is an absolutely massive piece of work that's really quite simple. Hopefully, if you've been out recording, you know where you've been. So it should.
What sort of level of detail do you want on that? Is it just parish, or do you want a street name or a farm name, or?
It's whatever feels appropriate for the record, to be honest. A parish as minimum would be absolutely fantastic. Anything more specific is obviously great, and it increases the value of the record. Should somebody want to go back and find it, really. So that would be, if there was one thing that I could get everyone who ever supplies us data with to do, it would be to standardize the location name slightly better. And I think the other thing that I spend a lot of time on is working through the comments of records. So some people put in incredibly helpful comments. Some people put in brilliant little stories into their comments, which actually makes working through and standardizing the data a real pleasure, to be honest. Particularly if it's sort of observations and that sort of social side in a way. But there are also some comments which are just really, really long and don't say a huge amount. And so I would say comments that kind of have meaning to the record are so helpful. And they're helpful when people are looking back. They also really help with standardizing as well. So yeah, they'd probably be my two biggest things, but Sue would probably say something different, to be honest.
No, I haven't got anything to add. I think, you know, it's part of the job, isn't it? We don't get many data sets that don't need some sorting out. And the good thing about NatureSpot data is it's the taxonomy is correct when that comes in, so that makes a huge difference. With other data sets, we do spend quite a bit of time researching taxonomy and taxon names, but NatureSpot and iRecord all use Natural History Museum Dictionary, I believe, yes, and the NBN. So there is that level of standardization there, but of course a lot of naturalists use names that were prevalent in their youth. I still do, which is now 45 years ago. So this can be a little bit tricky for younger people like Kirsty to sort of unpick, really. So another thing you could do if you weren't going through NatureSpot would be to try and, you know, use the most up-to-date species names that you can do. But if you're going through NatureSpot, you don't need to worry about that, which is a good reason for doing it.
We do try and prompt people, as you've said, Kirsty, to put the relevant information in their records. But of course, they don't necessarily respond to those prompts. I think we've had more discussions about prompting people and how to record than anything else over the last few years. But my favourite is always in the location box when it says "my garden." Which is quite correct, of course. That's exactly where they saw it. So not maybe that helpful.
No, but when you've got 1,000 of those to search through, that's a pretty disheartening afternoon.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, are there any other questions? Oh, question from Christine. Okay. How about grid references and the accuracy of grid references? If you walk, say, 2 miles, how many grid references along that 2-mile route would you like in an ideal world?
Every single meter differently. No, I think it depends what you're recording as well. I think there's a big difference between a plant which is static versus a bird which is flying over. We don't like real precision for some details. We used to have a lot of records on the database for otter that were recorded down to a centimetre, as if it was an otter balancing on its nose or on the tip of its tail, which is just a bit crazy, really. So the general advice that I would give, and I'm not saying that this is right, this is very much my personal opinion, would be that for things like plants, things that are kind of static, then, you know, try and record them to a kilometre square, really. Hopefully they match up to some OS maps or whatever that you're using, and that would be really helpful as a minimum. How many that equates to in a 2-mile walk, I don't know. I can't do metric to imperial conversion. I'm too young for that, shall I say.
It's 1.6 kilometres in a mile, possibly. So, so I don't know. 3.2. Yes, you could be straying into several kilometres over your 2 miles. So that could be a little bit of a problem. It would mean that some of your records probably wouldn't have the right grid reference. You need to think about how much that matters, really. As you say, if the bird is following you as you walk, then it doesn't really matter, does it? Yeah.
Having slagged off mobile phone apps, that is, of course, one area where they're useful. They will, as you wander around, if you've got your location turned on your mobile phone, they will, of course, record your location as you do things, potentially, at least. I mean, for NatureSpot, we use National Grid, and we like 6-figure grid references. It is worth mentioning possibly that sensitive species records are obscured, so things like badgers and rare orchids and things like that, we don't make that data publicly available on NatureSpot, so people shouldn't be afraid of recording exactly where they saw a rare plant, because we won't necessarily make that public for sensitive species. So just, we don't want people going along and digging them up, obviously. So okay, any more questions? Anyone want to ask Kirsty what type of mobile phone they should buy? Okay, so there's a question from Linda. If you've got a grid reference, why do you need a site name?
In many ways you don't. I think what the site name does is qualifies the records a little bit more. We see a lot of data where the site name and grid reference don't match. Despite grid reference being around for a long time, there's still a lot of error within it. It can be very easy to misread things. That's getting less as people are using more online tools to sort of find grid references, but it can happen. I think the other reason is that actually, when you're looking at data, if you're looking at a list of data, so you're looking at all water voles in Rutland or something like that, a list of grid references doesn't mean much to most people unless you have an ability to kind of convert grid references to a map in your head, whereas site names mean a lot more. And so I think it just makes the data a little bit more useful if you're looking at a list of data rather than looking at a map. Obviously, if you're looking at a distribution map, then grid references are all you will have anyway. But yeah, the site name just kind of qualifies it a little bit more, I think.
Okay, so I think I'll draw the formal session to a close now, and thank you, Kirsty, for revealing what goes on behind the curtain up at County Hall. I hope we've convinced some more people to do some more recording, but not create too much work for you, because now they'll all be giving you accurate site names and grid references and using the correct taxonomy. So thank you once again, Kirsty.
Thank you,
very interesting talk.